Okay, hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to my first ever episode of Success Mindset TV. And what an amazing first guest I've got, only Dawson Church. Hello, Dawson. Thank you so much for being with me today. I really appreciate you joining
Janine,
me.
it is such a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Oh, and can you, just for the viewers who might not know you, can you just tell us, just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you and who you are? That would be marvelous.
Sure. Well, I have been doing research on stress and especially the techniques that can reduce stress, like meditation and EFT tapping, for many, many years. I've written a series of books. The first was Soul Medicine, about
Yeah.
energy medicine. The next one was Genie in Your Genes, about epigenetics and energy psychology, and how just our consciousness and our energy has a direct effect on gene expression. And so there are a lot of things you can do epigenetically to affect gene expression and turn genes on and off. But the biggest one is your thoughts and your awareness and your mindset. So it's having a direct effect on genes, and we can measure how much and which genes now, which is really exciting with new scientific tools. And then I followed that up with a book called Mind to Matter, and that looks at the scientific links between a thought and a thing. So can our thoughts create things? And so I wrote that book to really explore what the science is behind that. And then finally, a new book coming out soon called Bliss Brain, and that is all about these elevated emotional states you can get into where you're just super happy after doing these stress reduction techniques. And so I've just been interested in personal growth and transformation from a very early age, like a teenager. I was really miserable back then. I just got happier and happier over the course of my life as I've done more of these things.
Yeah.
And now we've found techniques that literally, I did a retreat with about 40 people over New Year's Eve. And so many of these things have taken me about 50 years to figure out. And at that retreat, we had people sitting down, we had them hooked up to EEGs, and we found we were able to bring them into those elevated states in under 5 minutes.
Wow.
So with all that science and all that half a century of, for me, slowly figuring it out, that now in under 5 minutes, we can get people into that state. And our star person, one of the ladies in the retreat, was in that elevated brainwave state we're measuring on the EEG. She was there in 47 seconds. She closed her eyes, 47 seconds later, she's having a full-on enlightenment experience. So I love science, and that's why I try and use science to show us how we can get there quickly.
Yeah, science is amazing. And Dr. Joe Dispenza, he talks about similar things, doesn't he? Because I remember when I went to one of his workshops, he discussed very similar research, and it's so interesting, isn't it? And I love the science behind it, and that's obviously what you're famous for, you know. And in terms of looking at kind of EFT specifically, so emotional freedom technique, tapping, can you maybe tell the viewers first of all a little bit about what that is and how you first discovered? Because were you a researcher first, and then did you discover EFT tapping? How did that kind of come about, Dawson?
Yeah, I was in a real crisis point in my life, and I was in my mid-40s, and I had a lot of challenges. I had two young kids at home. I was a single dad. I had some really big financial and business challenges. I had a string of pretty miserable failed relationships, and so I was not a very happy guy in my mid-40s, and I made a commitment at that point to meditating every day.
Okay.
And that was really the pivot point. I then that same year discovered EFT tapping, energy psychology. And before that, I focused on spirituality and Gestalt therapy. And those really helped me, but they had helped me slowly over decades become less unhappy. Suddenly with meditation and then with tapping, I was getting really a lot happier, and I was solving personal problems I had never been able to solve before. So it was really, really powerful for me to solve these things that seemed insoluble with those slow improvements I'd seen before. And so EFT tapping makes use of the body's acupuncture meridians. And there are 12 of these. We, of course, know what acupuncture is. We insert needles in these little points, and then the body's energy flows are regulated using that. So you feel better once you have acupuncture usually, and the energy flow is promoted. But you can also stimulate them with your fingertips just by tapping on them like this. And research shows that tapping is equivalent in efficacy to kneeling. And so we have people think about things that happen to them that upset them or that have traumatized them. And we're not just talking about people who are like I was worried about my business back then, and I was tapping on my business and money and things like that.
Mhm.
We've used this with people in Rwanda whose parents were killed with machetes in the 1994 Rwandan genocide. We've used this with Vietnam veterans, like one of the veterans we worked with. He was in a field hospital in Vietnam in 1970, and there was a mortar attack, and 18 people were killed. And so just horrendous scenes. We've used this in Haiti after the 2010 earthquake there with hundreds of caregivers, hundreds and hundreds of children. And we've seen their PTSD symptoms like flashbacks and nightmares go away. So I'm just getting chills as I say this, Janine, realizing that all of these people would still be suffering if we
Sure.
didn't have this amazingly easy way of regulating emotion. So you think about the bad stuff. And now if you think about the bad stuff in the normal course of things, if you think about the car crash or the bullying or the miserable father or mother or whatever it was you had, and you don't intervene in some way, then you light up those neural pathways in your brain. They signal other neurons in your brain, and those neural pathways get bigger and faster. And so if you think about the bad stuff in your life without some kind of effective intervention, you actually have this phenomenon called re-traumatization. You
Yeah.
literally re-traumatize yourself, and your PTSD symptoms can get worse over time. But if you regulate your energy while you're thinking about those things, then the part of the brain that records threats, it's right in the middle of the brain, it's called the hippocampus, and it's responsible for remembering the bad stuff from your past and making sure it doesn't bite you again in the future. And so that part of the brain, if you think about a negative memory and then do the tapping and regulate your energy system, then suddenly your energy system regulates and your hippocampus realizes that that bad thing that happened to you in the earthquake in Haiti or in Vietnam, or being hurt by your brother when you were 6 years old, or being disappointed and losing the love of your life at 14, whatever it might have been, it realizes that the hippocampus has been, whenever you've thought about those things before and re-traumatized yourself, the hippocampus has an association between the memory and going into fight or flight. You get stressed when you think about that.
Yeah.
Now, when you tap and you pair that memory with this soothing emotional and energy regulation of tapping, the hippocampus realizes that that bad thing that happened to you when you were 6 years old is not a threat to your survival today.
Yeah.
So you remember the bad stuff still, but you no longer go into fight or flight, and people just calm down. And so they still remember the trauma of their past, they just are no longer emotionally reactive to it, which is why it's called emotional freedom techniques.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. It's simply amazing, isn't it? And I think there's a lot of kind of, people are very skeptical of it, aren't they? I remember when someone started tapping on me, and I was like, what is this weird thing? Like, how's it going to help me? And I was really skeptical, and I was still skeptical when I went on my first training course. Like, well, why do you think that is? Why are people so skeptical, do you think?
In Mind to Matter, I try to explain this, and I think that part of it is our Western focus on matter rather than energy.
Sure.
So if you have a symptom, you go see the doctor and you get a pill. And
Yeah.
so we think that it's the pill, and we don't realize the power. So in my books, I'm really trying to show people the power of energy
Yeah.
and consciousness and non-material things to affect the body. Just for example, one early study I did more than 10 years ago was we looked at people's levels of cortisol. Now, cortisol is a master hormone. It triggers the expression of genes, various other hormones, various other proteins. And so we looked at the expression of the genes, excuse me, that govern the production of cortisol. And in our earliest trials, we looked at the level of cortisol that people had in their bodies.
Yeah.
And so in one particular triple-blind randomized controlled trial, it was published in the oldest peer-reviewed journal in America. So it's a big time journal, important study, triple-blind, highest possible standard of proof. And we compared an hour of EFT to an hour of talk therapy to an hour of rest. And we found that people's levels of anxiety and depression dropped more than twice as much in the EFT group as the other two groups. So it was a really powerful proof that our literally shifting our thinking is improving our mental state. But the real proof was in the level of cortisol people had. and their level of cortisol dropped dramatically as they did EFT, and much less in the other two groups. So what that's showing us is that shifts in energy, shifts in consciousness are producing molecular changes in the body. We then follow that up with gene expression changes, and we looked at several studies showed that gene expression is changing. So immunity genes are upregulating. Genes that suppress inflammation are upregulating. All of these things are upregulating in clinical trials when we tap. So it doesn't just mean that we use pills and surgery and mechanical means and material means to help ourselves heal. The power of energy to help us heal is dramatic. And just yesterday, actually, I was talking to a friend of mine, and I can use her name and disclose a lot of details about her case because she has written a book about her experiences. But she was diagnosed in March 2017 as having metastasized breast cancer. She had a large tumor in her right breast, 5 centimeters in diameter, and all of the lymph nodes under her right armpit were all inflamed and swollen.
Sure.
So when the cancer escapes from the tumor and then makes its way into the lymph system, then it travels all throughout the body, seeds other tumors, multiple metastases, and it's, I mean, your chances of survival are very, very small.
Sure.
So she got this absolutely shocking diagnosis in March of 2017. And of course, the doctors recommended chemotherapy and radiation, conventional treatments. But Beth, my friend, said, you know, before I dive into all of that, I'm going to see what energy and consciousness and alternative medicine can do for me. Yeah. So, like, she phoned me in a panic one day and she said, Dawson, you know, I've had the gene test and I have 8 defective genes, some of which predispose me to breast cancer. And I said, Beth, you have 24,000 genes in your cells. That means 23,992 are just fine. Yeah. Let's work with those. So we did some surrogate tapping with her. She did a lot of energy things to help shift her consciousness. She quit listening to the news. She quit all the alerts on her cell phone and her laptop. She quit doing all of the work that stressed her out. She quit spending any time with people who weren't positive. She fasted from negative media, negative music, negative movies. She filled her life with positivity, creativity, and joy. She did Qigong. She went and got hyperbaric oxygen treatments. She did a lateral treatment in Mexico, alternative medicine treatments. So she did absolutely everything possible to shift her energy. And so in March, she got this diagnosis. She went back to this major cancer clinic in May. Just 2 months later, the tumor had shrunk from 5 centimeters to 1.4 centimeters and was necrotic, means it was just dead tissue. It was just going away. It just went away eventually completely. All the lymph nodes under her right armpit were completely clear and free of cancer. Later on in August, she had a blood biopsy and it showed that her system was completely free of cancer. I talked to her yesterday. Her latest tests show that 3 years later, she's cancer-free still. And that's the power of energy and consciousness to shift our bodies. We're literally making molecules like stress molecules, like cortisol, or we're making healing molecules like DHEA, like oxytocin, like serotonin, like dopamine. All of these are being synthesized by this thing behind our eyes over here. So I'm not saying never take an aspirin or never, may never need therapy. I mean, I use modern medicine. I have a great doctor. I take a pill occasionally if I need to, but I really focus on the power of energy therapies to shift my life.
Yeah, yeah. And as you say, it's so powerful. I don't think people sometimes understand the power of it. And I'm an EFT practitioner, and I've talked about EFT all around in the UK, all around the country. And your name always comes up in my talk, because I always talk about the research, and I say, Dawson Church, he spearheads research. I mean, aside from Gary Craig, the innovator, I think you are Mr. EFT, given the research that you've conducted over the years is just phenomenal. And kind of, how did you get into that research in the first place in relation to, was it because you discovered EFT and then you wanted to read? How did that kind of happen, and talk me through how that kind of research started, because as you say, that research you talked about where the cortisol lowers, that's such a famous study, and that's what I talk about. But how did that kind of come about? And talk me through that. Obviously, discuss some of the research, and it, you know, but that'd be interesting to hear how that kind of came about.
Yeah, well, you need research to call a therapy evidence-based.
Sure.
And when I got involved in energy therapies shortly after the turn of the last century, I had many conversations with people in energy therapies. They were saying, well, these really work. Look at all the case histories. And Gary Craig had over 2,000 case histories online. Roger Callahan, from whom Gary Craig learned, he had a lot of case histories, had a best-selling book called The 5-Minute Phobia Cure. And people like Gary Craig and Roger Callahan were saying, we don't need research. It's just self-evident. You tap, you feel better. And we have all these stories of people who are sharing how much it's improved their lives. And what I was saying is, yeah, stories are great, but, and you have these 2,000 stories on the internet, but imagine if you were you had a serious disease, you went into your doctor, and your doctor said, you know, I want to give you this treatment. And you said, well, do you think this treatment works? And the doctor says, well, I think it might work. There are thousands of stories about how it works. And you say, well, is there any research? Are there any clinical trials? Are there any randomized controlled trials? And the doctor says, well, actually, there are none. But take it on faith. This works because all people have told me it does work. You wouldn't want to have that therapy, nor would it be ethical for the doctor to give you a therapy based purely on stories found
Sure.
online. You need solid scientific research. Now, at that time, I wasn't a researcher.
Okay.
I actually went back to university. I retrained myself as a researcher. I wrote a dissertation, which then became Soul Medicine, a second dissertation, which became Genie in Your Genes. And I retrained myself as a researcher and then began to talk to other people in the field and put together research teams, some of them from people from Harvard University, people from Bond University in Australia. I've done a ton of work with people from Staffordshire University and Staffordshire in the UK, several clinical trials with them. They've done a bunch of their own studies too. And so now there are over 100 studies showing that EFT works. So now when you go to your doctor is able to offer you these techniques and know they're evidence-based. So that's why I did it. I knew we needed those studies to prove that this really works. So now, if you look at NICE in the UK, you'll find that NICE is including EFT in the kinds of therapies it's looking into in the future for PTSD, for anxiety, for depression. In the US, the Veterans Administration is using EFT and has approved EFT as a generally safe therapy. Various other hospital systems in South Korea, EFT is now regarded as an evidence-based therapy. It's being used in a lot of hospitals and clinics in South Korea. Many countries have approved EFT as a treatment. And so it's part of this new wave of treatments using energy, using consciousness, but only because of all those studies. People can point to and say, okay, we know numerically, we know statistically how much EFT works. So just knowing that it works is great. But knowing, for example, that the average reduction in pain in an EFT session is 2/3. So your pain, on average, 2/3 of pain goes away if you tap. On average, if you tap for a weekend, a couple of days intensity, like at a workshop, we know that from various pieces of research that about 45% of your anxiety and depression symptoms will disappear. Now, does that mean if you tap for 4 days, that double the amount will disappear? No, you need more than EFT. And in fact, I recommend a suite of evidence-based therapies. So earthing, grounding, time in nature, ancient therapies, ancient forms of movement like Qigong, yoga, Tai Chi, all of those things are really useful. And EFT is a really useful standalone stress reduction method. You can use it to reduce your stress. It'll work for that. But for example, we've had many people in EFT who do reduce their stress, but unless they work on themselves, they don't necessarily change that much. So for really deep personality change, you need meditation, you may need talk therapy, or you may need various kinds of counseling. So it's part of a group of self-care practices, which I recommend people use. In my book, Mind to Matter, I have 30 of these things, and I recommend people just dabble in each of them and then put together a package of practices that really fits well for your personal lifestyle.
Yeah, it's really important, isn't it, to look at, what kind of suits you. But you talked obviously just before there about, EFT, as obviously been mentioned, the nice guidelines, which is fantastic. But I've done some research myself, as you know, and it's in the Energy Psychology Journal. I'm very happy about that. But in terms of why do you think EFT hasn't quite reached mainstream yet? Why do you think the progress has been quite slow? What would you think the reason is behind that from your experience?
Yeah, I wrote a paper about this for a peer-reviewed psychiatry journal. And why is innovation so slow? Again, why is getting EFT to patients, why it's taken so many years, 25 years, for it to begin to make real inroads? And the answer is that it's the norm. When we looked at various government figures for new therapies, it's shocking. And what we found was that it takes an average of 17 years for a new therapy to go from being proven in the lab, in research, to getting to the patient. 17 years. And that, if that's not bad enough news, what's even worse is that of every 5 effective new therapies discovered and proven in the lab, only 1 ever gets to the patient. The other 4 do not. So the analogy is that, I say that, Janine, if I told you I was going to give you a cell phone, free cell phone, I'm going to send you a free cell phone, package it up, put it in the mail, and send a free cell phone to Manchester, to you they're in Manchester. So you're going to get a free cell phone in the mail in a few days. And so that sounds, a free cell phone sounds really nice. Then I tell you, okay, this cell phone is 17 years old, and 4 out of its 5 features are disabled. I'm going to give you a 17-year-old piece of technology which is 80% disabled. Now, how exciting is that? I mean, would you be excited about that? No way.
Maybe not.
And yet we tolerate that when it comes to our health and our bodies. It is outrageous that we demand the newest technology. We want the latest car. We want self-driving features. We want to be in a self-driving, there's self-flying drones being tested now. There's a whole fleet of self-driving trucks delivering stuff all over Texas. No drivers required. I mean, all these things are happening on the technological front. Our society makes so many leaps and bounds. And when it comes to taking care of this thing that we live in, that whether you have depression, anxiety, pain, autoimmune diseases, is vital to your quality of life, whether you have the ability to overcome those things or not. And yet we're willing to accept 17-year-old medicine and only 20% of it. I mean, it's just crazy that that's the way our medical system is so biased against innovation, but it is. So what I found, like Beth Meisner, my friend with the metastasized breast cancer, the thing about Beth is that she did not buy the paradigm. She did not take on the worldview of her conventional medical treatment. She said, I'm going to go out there and see what else there is out there and what I can do. And she did. Now, Beth is a very, very wealthy woman. And so I found that the people in my world who have either a lot of wealth or a lot of good contacts, like she can pick up the phone and call Mark Hyman, she can call me, she can call Mehmet Oz, she can call all these, Andrew Weil, all these internationally famous people and get answers. And so those people who have access are able to get healed from all kinds of things, and often really quickly. Like in my book, Mind to Matter, I have a study showing that the waves you produce in certain kinds of meditation in your brain, there's this wave called gamma waves, and they're waves at basically 30 cycles per second. So those neurons are firing at 30 cycles per second or higher. That wave, in several studies now, animal studies, and now starting clinical trials in humans, that wave in the very first mouse studies, it showed that the gamma wave, when passed through the brains of those mice, cleared away 50% of the Alzheimer's plaques in those mouse brains in 1 hour. 1 hour of gamma is sweeping the brain clear of 50% of Alzheimer's plaques. Now, there are huge numbers of people. Alzheimer's is one of the biggest killers of people in the world nowadays. All kinds of people know this. And the tragedy is Sure, 17 years from now, they're going to be getting gamma treatments, but you want to be not waiting and
Yeah,
relying on conventional medicine. You want to be going out there, find the leading edge, and apply it to your depression, your anxiety, your pain, whatever it is that ails you. I mean, you're going to have a dramatically better life if you do that. So that's the story. The very sad reality of medical innovation is that it takes a long time. It's really slow, and if you want to be a Beth, you don't go get yourself treated by ancient medicine. You don't want to go back to the leeches and
yeah,
bloodletters of the Middle Ages. You want to basically go out and take responsibility, and you'll find those doctors. There are wonderful physicians now. There are people who are on the leading edge who can help you with all those things.
yeah, yeah, sure. Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? Yeah, it's like you said, the amount of time that it takes. It's just, and kind of following on from that, kind of just finally, where do you kind of see the future of energy medicine and EFT? Where do you see the future of that? Another 17? No. I mean, I think things.
Yeah, let's
Oh, maybe
fast
a famous laugh. I was going to try and tell you a joke, but I couldn't think of any. But I knew that laugh would come.
Let's
You
go to
know,
2037 and see. Yeah, they're going to become more and more widespread. I mean, now it's
yeah,
controversial that energy and consciousness are part of medicine.
yeah,
There are people who still argue that consciousness is an epiphenomenon of complicated brains. As our brains evolve, that threw up this phenomenon called consciousness. But in Mind to Matter, in my book Mind to Matter, I show how, in fact, our brains are receivers of consciousness from the realm of non-local mind. So mind is not local. Our brains are local, and our local minds, I mean, I'm using my local mind to, I've got a checkbook over here, which I'm making sure there's enough money in the checking account, and I'm making sure I put on a shirt, and I'm making sure I turned on the recording, and I did all these things. I'm using material reality and my local mind. But every morning in meditation, I sit there and I just enter this elevated state, which I call bliss brain. And in that, all of these neurotransmitters and hormones are being produced, these genes are firing. You feel subjectively wonderful. And also now we're measuring amazing things are going on inside your brain, and those are reshaping your brain. In one of the stories in Mind to Matter, this particular TV reporter who was who's going through a mindfulness training for 8 weeks was assessed by a laboratory before and after, which took high resolution MRI images of his brain. And the chunk of his brain in the center of the brain that governs emotional regulation in that 8 weeks grew by 22.8%. That's how quickly our brains are remodeling themselves based on consciousness. So these methods, these energy therapies are going to become widespread. They're going to become part of standard care in the next while. They'll also contribute to a massive increase in human well-being. And at the end of Bliss Brain, I talk all about this, how, like right now, if you look at the news, it's easy to get all distracted and confused and upset and unhappy. But if you zoom out historically, just for example, money. In Bliss Brain, I talk about money near the end of the book. And just look at the statistics that show that over the last 30 years, actually more like 35 years, the average global citizen across the world is 3 times as rich as he or she was 35 years ago. And that includes the crash of 1989, of 2000, of 2008, of 2020. Factoring all those crashes in, the average global citizen's wealth is increasing. Lifespan across the world has doubled in the last century. Infant mortality, babies dying, moms dying, has plunged. Literacy has increased. Female literacy has increased dramatically. Women's empowerment, women's rights, human rights. If you look at the large-scale trajectories of all of these things, the Black Lives Matter movement is part of this huge. I mean, sure, there were protests when Black people were being killed by the police 10 years ago in America, but there weren't protests for those killings in Sweden and in other parts of the world. And so what's happened is we're in the middle of this massive shift in human consciousness. So these therapies will increasingly become part of medicine, and also they will contribute to this enormous shift in global flourishing, improving longevity. People will expect to be healthy and vibrant at 70, 80, 90, way beyond 100. We're going to have a huge number of centenarians, people who are not just making it to 100, but people who are healthy at 100, who are vibrant at 100, who are having sex and going on vacations and going skiing and exercising and riding bicycles and doing all the things, surfing at 100, you know? So that's where we're headed.
Oh, yeah, it's amazing. Honestly, I could talk to you all day, Dawson, I really could, but I know you're a very, very, very busy man. I just really, really want to, say thank you so much. Obviously, I've read all your books. All Dawson's books are amazing, viewers. Go and order them. And yeah, just really thank you for taking the time out to talk to me. It's been wonderful just listening to everything you've had to say today. So I really appreciate you joining me. Thank you so much.
I love sharing. I wake up every morning, Janine, and I feel so good, and I just love sharing this. And when I was doing my New Year's resolutions and tuning into the non-local mind this last year, at midnight on December 31st and the first moment of January, I said, universe, what's my mission for the next year? And the universe, I guess a little voice said, I've given you the gift of happiness. Now go give it to everyone else.
Yeah. Yeah, oh bless you, fantastic. Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, that gift of happiness, that's a way to finish on, isn't it? Because it's about how we can do that for ourselves and using these tools to create happiness. That's what it's all about, isn't it? Definitely. Thank you so much. Thank you. Take care. Yes, we're recording for your story. Go ahead.
Here's the difference mindset can make. So when we had the pandemic of early 2020 and the financial crash, obviously many industries were affected, and one of those affected was restaurants, which had to close. They couldn't have their dining rooms open anymore. People couldn't dine in close proximity. And I remember taking a walk down the street of the town I live in at that time, and I remember looking at shop after shop that was closed. And one of the shops that closed was called Murphy's Pub. And I looked at the windows of Murphy's Pub. It was dark in the dining room. All the chairs were on top of the tables. And there was a sign outside on the door, this hand-lettered cardboard sign that said, "It's been a wonderful 32-year ride, but there's no light at the end of this tunnel, so we're closing for good. Thank you." And I felt so sad when I read that sign outside Murphy's Pub, because 32 years they'd survived 2 recessions, they'd survived all kinds of turmoil, and now they were closing for good. So that was one response of one owner of a restaurant to the pandemic. Later that week, my wife and I wanted to order food and have a meal that we didn't cook ourselves. We were getting a little bored of our own cooking. So we decided to order from a local establishment called Betty's Barbecue. And the way it worked was that you'd phone in your order or email in your order, and then half an hour later, you drive up to Betty's Barbecue. The dining room was closed, but there was a table out front. You just walk up, grab your order, and leave. So when I walked up to get my order, I grabbed my bag, but Betty at Betty's Barbecue happened to be behind the table. And I said to her, "How are you doing?" And she was saying, "Oh, we're doing great. We're having all these people come and order." And she said, I'd always wanted to open a takeout business, but I never got around to it. And now the pandemic has forced me to open the takeout business. So even though my dining room is closed, I have this wonderful takeout business. And I said, "Well, but what about all the servers, the wait staff and bus people that used to work in the dining room?" And Betty said, "Well, we're so busy that I've retrained them all as food preparation people, and they still have their jobs." So think about that for a moment. Murphy, with the exact same circumstances, becomes sad and shuts down. That's his mindset. Betty, her mindset is, "I'm going to open that business I've always wanted." Now, what happened after the pandemic was, of course, Murphy stayed closed. Betty now has 2 businesses. She has her nearly open dining room, and her second business is a takeout business. She now has double the number of businesses she had before. And that's entirely due to mindset. It's not the circumstances that happen that determine the outcome. It's your response through your mindset to those circumstances that determines what happens for you.
Yeah, 100%. And I was talking about that the other day. It's about, during this time, how you can diversify. And you've got, I was certainly saying that last week. You've got businesses who are failing, but other businesses are saying, right, we're going to do this, this, this. And that makes all the difference, doesn't it? And it all goes back to that, doesn't it? 100%. No, it's
Yeah.
amazing. Well, thank you for that other little story. Betty tea rooms. We've got Betty's tea rooms in England. It's very famous. Once again, Dawson, honestly, thank you so much for your time today. It really, really does mean a lot. I've been shouting about this all over social media, and I will continue to shout about our wonderful talk. It's been fantastic. Thank you so much. You take care. Enjoy
It's been a pleasure. Thank you and bless you.
So much, Dawson. Bless you.